Mr. President, I'd like to speak about the shutdown that has now occurred.
Without objection.
Mr. President, to say that I am outraged is an understatement. What we need is for the folks down there at the other end of the United States Capitol building to open up this government. The economy of this country is at risk, and they have done it to advance their own narrow extremist agenda. And so all of this is due to a relatively small group of lawmakers down in the House of Representatives, some 40, maybe 60, who are intent on having their own way on a personal agenda and who are refusing to work with their fellow Republicans as well as Democrats down in the House of Representatives. And the result is what we have, a forced government shutdown that's doing a lot of damage to a lot of people. And that's why it's important for the American people to say that they've had enough and they want these folks to stop this nonsense. Now, we ought to be keeping the government open, but consider a couple of things. Consider, for example, at the National Institute of Health, that they are now unable to bring in 800 patients that they were going to start to give medical treatment in breakthrough medical techniques and developments. 800 folks. And at the same time, what the National Institute of Health, one of the premier agencies in all of this alphabet soup of agencies that we talk about it as NIH. They've had to lay off, furlough, 70% of their civilian workforce. All right, a few minutes ago, you heard the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Senator Dianne Feinstein, out here explaining that the Director of National Intelligence has told her that he has had to furlough 72% of the civilians in the intelligence community. I mean, that's ridiculous. We've got terrorists that are trying to do us harm. And he's had to furlough 72%. Take, for example, NASA. 92% of NASA civilian workers, not 92, 97% of the space program is being laid off.
Mr. President, would my friend, the distinguished senator from Florida, yield for unanimous?
Of course I would. All right, as I understand what the majority leader has just done, the Senate has appointed conferees on the Farm Bill. All right, there is an example of where, when you have the political will, you can get together and you can get things accomplished. And giving the examples of the National Institute of Health and how they're being decimated, how NASA is being decimated, how all of the intelligence agencies, 72% of all the civilians in the intelligence agencies, read CIA. Folks, we're in a war with those people that are trying to do harm to us. And we're having these people furloughed all because of a small group who are intent on their agenda, a small group of the Tea Party in one house of one branch of government are being irresponsible and reckless. Now, the truth is, if the Speaker would just bring up what we call the continuing resolution, which is all of the appropriations bills put together up to a date certain, November the 15th, if the Speaker of the House just brought that up, it would pass overwhelmingly with Democrats and Republicans both voting for it, not the extremist small group down there. But the Speaker doesn't bring it up. And so what I see is happening, if this lasts for more than a day or two, the American people are going to get so irritated that their lives are disrupted, that they can't get government services. And I think the people of this country are going to be so upset that they're going to insist that their government open up once again. Now, I want to give you an example. Mr. President, I am never ceased to be amazed at the fine work that the fine people that I have the privilege of working with do for the people of my state. And so it is not unusual when I'm going into a meeting or I'm in the airport or I'm walking down the street, wherever I am in the state of Florida, it is clearly commonplace for people to come up and say to me, I want you to know that I appreciate so much what you did to help me out, what you did for my mother, my son, my brother who is a veteran. And what they're talking about is all of these dedicated people that I have the great privilege of working with me to help the people of our state on the day-to-day necessities of their daily lives, such as they're in an emergency situation, they realize that their passport has expired, or they lost their passport, or they didn't get their veterans payment, or they need help getting their brother into a veterans hospital, or something happened to their Social Security payment, or they need information about this particular piece of legislation, or they're concerned about somebody that they saw that they thought were doing things and they need them to be referenced to the correct agency on a security matter. I mean, it goes on. And these wonderful people that we have working with us, some young, some older, many of the ones that have been with me for years, they are so dedicated and they work day and night. They work their fingers to the bone. They know exactly who to call or to email to get things done for people back home in need. And now, Mr. President, you know what's going to happen? They call any one of our offices in Florida. They're going to get a recording of my voice telling them what has happened and how all of these folks have been furloughed, and giving them an emergency contact as the one lifeline that we can provide. So what happens next, Mr. President? If reasonable people were doing this, we would have never shut down in the first place. If people who were bipartisan, who had some common sense, who recognized that you can't have it your way all the time, but in the best of American tradition, that you have to respect the other fellow's point of view and then work out your differences to achieve a consensus in order to gain a workable solution. If those kind of reasonable folks had been operating, then we would have never shut down in the first place. And so we had asked and you've heard this over and over in the speeches today. I had voted for, in the Budget Committee, a budget. It came out, it came to the floor. We had over 100 amendments. It took hours and hours, and we finally passed a budget, which was the outline for the appropriations for the next fiscal year. We passed that in the Senate 6 months ago. The House did the same thing. They passed out a budget. But when we asked to go to a conference committee to get agreement of working out the differences between the two, that small group would not let the conference not only convene, but even be appointed. Mr. President, I think the majority leader of the U.S. Senate will tell you that we're ready to meet right now. But they've got to open up the government again. And we've got to put these people back to work that are trying to serve the American people and to protect the American people. And hopefully, if the American people hear these messages, they will get sufficiently agitated and insist that once again, the crowd that has shut us down instead should open up the government. Mr. President, I yield the floor.